Senator Strom Thurmond has served in the United States Senate since first elected in 1954. The 77-year-old South Carolina senator was in Columbus last week speaking to the Ohio Petroleum Marketers Association, and he had some harsh comments for the United States military situation.
I'm very concerned about the situation because the Soviets now have the strongest navy in the world. In the World War II, they practically had no navy. They have about twice as many people under arms as we do. They have more tanks, several times more artillery than we do. And the Warsaw Pact countries are stronger than NATO in Europe. Now, I was disappointed that the President didn't supply the bomb that we need over there, the nuclear bomb, to stop those tanks. It's very important, I think, that we do that, but he hadn't seen fit to do it yet. This particular bomb, nuclear bomb, will go through the tank and kill the drivers. And that's the only way we could stop these tanks, because they have several times more than we do. However, there'll be no blast there, and there'll be no thermal effects hardly like you had in Japan when the bomb was dropped there. The whole strength of our military, the Soviets have a new bomber, the backfire bomber. We don't have a new World War II. We have some F-111s, but these are not adequate. We need a modern new bomber, and we need to double our ship program. The President cut it in half.
So who is number one?
I think today the Soviets are number one without question. Of course, I think the people back home, too, I'd like to know how they feel about strengthening our military department. My position is that we should strengthen it, all facets of it. Otherwise, we are subjecting our freedom to a hazard. Our very freedom is dependent upon a strong military establishment and a strong economy to support that establishment. And if we don't do that, we are really in danger, because today the Soviets are the strongest power in the world. Their goal is to take the world. Their goal is to dominate the world, to rule the world, with Moscow as the headquarters. And it shouldn't be necessary for this to happen if we'll keep strong militarily. Now we don't want a strong military establishment to start a war. We want it to preserve the peace. And if you have a strong military establishment, we can preserve the peace and prevent a war.
Senator, what is your view on the draft?
I'm in favor of registering the young men, and I would go further than the President. I think we ought to put the draft into effect. Things move so fast today. In World War II, we had the oceans to protect us. We had several years to get ready to fight. Now, it's a matter of minutes. You just don't have that time. I think the draft ought to be put back into effect. I think it'd be fair to everybody. In this land of opportunity and freedom we have here, I think every young man ought to be willing to serve his country for 1 or 2 years.
Should the draft include women?
No, I don't think so. I think women ought to be allowed to volunteer, and ought to be given every privilege and every right of the men if they do volunteer. But I don't think it's necessary to draft the women.
On the energy situation, Americans are seeing the price of gasoline rise, it seems like every single month. What can the United States do to either stabilize or bring gasoline prices down?
Well, they can do several things. We've got to convert our boilers from oil and gas to coal. We've got to make oil from coal shale. In other words, we've got to use more coal. And the other thing, I think we've got to explore for more oil and gas onshore and offshore, because we've got oil and gas here if it's a proper encouragement and incentive to go after it. And then the other thing, we've got to build more nuclear plants, and we've got to reprocess. Down in Barnwell, South Carolina, they've got a big commercial reprocessing plant. The President shut it down. Well, that plant would produce, by reprocessing there, you retrieve the energy in these spent tubes, and it makes it safer for humanity that you take it out all you can, and then what's left will be a smaller amount and less dangerous to humanity. And that would amount alone to 1 million barrels a day. That's as much as we get from the Alaska pipeline.
How effective do you think President Carter's inflation plan will be?
Well, he's taken steps before, he claims, to low inflation, but he hadn't taken the right steps. The two main causes of inflation One is when we spend more than we take in. And we haven't balanced the budget but 8 times in 50 years, haven't balanced the budget but 1 time in the last 20 years. And that's the main cause of inflation. The other cause is when imports exceed exports. And the reason for that is all the oil we're bringing in from the OPEC countries and foreign nations. And that has unbalanced the budget. Another thing is automobiles and televisions from Japan and other countries. Well, I would like to ask the viewers at home how they feel about a balanced budget. And if they feel as I do about it, I hope they'll write their senators and House members and tell them so. Because this is a very crucial situation. We must balance this budget. That's the chief cause of inflation. That's the chief cause of the high interest rates. That's the cost of the high standard of living now. And it's very essential that we take steps along this line.
On the political scene, who do you think is going to receive the Republican nomination?
I think Ronald Reagan is going to win the Republican nomination. He's a very able man. He's a sound man. He made an excellent governor of California, and I think he'll be elected president.